from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
The panelists join with me today, Janelle Burke and Steve Shink, in celebrating a very, very special time on the Public Forum. For all of our viewers across the Northwest and Canada, we're coming to you for the 25th year of the North Idaho College Public Forum, and throughout this year we will be celebrating that silver anniversary, and we're so pleased to have had this opportunity to be on the air with you over all of these years. I'm sure you have noticed from our introduction that we have a new set to celebrate this 25th year, and I have to give a very special thanks to Lindy Turner, who is the technical director of the North Idaho College Public Forum, for the set design and the new credits and all. We're really, really excited about this new opportunity to be with you. I also want to thank Mary Carr, who is the executive producer of this program, along with Tom Lyons, who is the coordinator of instructional technology at North Idaho College. It is with their help and their staff that we're able to do this new design and to continue what we've been doing in the past and concentrating on the content of the core of this particular program. I decided it would be wonderful to start out the 25th year on a subject that we all can celebrate together and brings lots of understanding and harmony to society, and that is the field of art. I am welcoming to the program today two very, very special guests on the topic, a place called Ferdinand, Idaho. And this particular subject is dealing with art, as I indicated, and it involves oil pastel paintings by Mary Francis, who is our first guest today. In fact, there are a total of 22 such paintings about the history of that very special small town in our state. And along with her, we have Eugene Schaefer, who did 12 short essays concerning this great work. And as we go through the program today with you viewers, and again next week, we'll learn a lot about how you capture the history of a community in both essay form and in beautiful paintings. At this time, Mary Francis and Eugene Schaefer, welcome to the program. We're delighted that you can be with us on this special occasion and share what I know has taken years of work for you. I would add, in introducing you, that this work has been on tour through Idaho into several towns and cities since September 1995, and with this program we're taping in September 1996, the tour ends and a number of the works have been bought and will go into private collections. Again, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much.
And I'm so delighted to have back again this year our two regular panelists. First is Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and next to her is Steve Shink, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and we will ask Janelle to start off our program for the 25th year.
Mary Francis, you're an artist, and something about Ferdinand must have attracted you. What was it that drew your attention to the town of Ferdinand?
I had lived in Coeur d'Alene for 7 or 8 years before I moved to Seattle. Throughout those years, I had traveled to Boise and back and gone through this small town called Ferdinand. A friend of mine had lived there and was born and raised there. So I got to know some of the local people there, her family, and each time through to Boise I would stop and visit Eugene Schaefer and Ella Schaefer, and became really comfortable in this small community. For me, there's a great sense of energy and peace in that Camas Prairie area there, but in particular Ferdinand was a very comfortable place. Each time as I was traveling back and forth, I realized that a new building or an old building had been torn down, and I became concerned about how this community was going to be recorded or preserved somehow. So I decided I would do a painting on a building, about a building that was going to be torn down. And that started the whole project. Through that, another building was going to be torn down. I thought, well, maybe I should do a painting about that. And before I knew it, there was this whole series of paintings. The paintings also gave a lot of information about Ferdinand, but there were stories and history about Ferdinand that I couldn't get across in just the paintings. So I asked Mr. Schaefer if he would be interested in writing some text. I knew that he was a good writer, and he knew a lot about the history and had a real love for Ferdinand. So that kind of started it.
So, Jean, then what did you do? How did you know about Ferdinand? What is your relationship with Ferdinand?
Well, my folks moved from Indiana into Idaho and settled in Ferdinand. So I was a native born. I was born and raised there, lived all my life in that town.
Do you live there now?
Yes, I do. I live within 3 miles of where I was born.
And how do you make a living there?
I'm a farmer rancher. I ranch out in the Lawyers Canyon area, and we farm and raise cattle.
So tell me, where exactly is Ferdinand? Mary Frances, how do we find our way to Ferdinand if we wanted to go?
Well, it used to be easier. There's now a highway bypass. It bypasses the community of Ferdinand, but if you go south from Lewiston towards Grangeville or Boise, within about 45 minutes you'll reach a small place called Ferdinand, and you'll have to turn off now to find Ferdinand.
Steve Sheen.
Well, I want to back up just a little bit and learn a little bit more about you two, and I'm going to start with Mary Frances since I know now a little more about you, Jean. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you became an artist.
My art actually started right here in Coeur d'Alene at North Idaho College, and that's where I received my first academic training in art. And
How was that experience, by the way?
That experience was, to be very honest, was the best art experience that I've received, and I draw back on that for inspiration and support. It was a really good base of information for me to continue throughout these years. The academic education was really important to me, as well as the artistic support within the community of the artists here. Pat Flammia, painting with him, was also very instructional. So that's the kind of that's the background that I have from the Coeur d'Alene area. I finished in my art degree at Seattle University and have continued painting from my studio since then.
Wonderful. And Eugene, we know what you do for a living, but how did your interest in writing evolve?
Well, I really can't answer that very well because this is my first attempt at it, and I feel like I might just say maybe I got conned into it. No, she had these, she did these paintings. She said she wanted to do these paintings. Would I write an article for her? I said that would be fine. So that's where it started. She kept adding paintings and kept asking for more writings, and it just evolved. It was nothing really planned, and this is my first attempt at any writings. I really don't call them writings as much as just thoughts on papers.
Tony, if I've got time for one more question. Mary Frances, you told us that the project really kind of came out of one painting that you did. So maybe this question isn't entirely fair, but I'll offer it to either of you. What's special about Ferdinand? I mean, I've seen lots of small towns, and maybe they all deserve this kind of treatment, but I don't think it happens very often. What moved you to do this work about Ferdinand?
Well, for me, and it may be different for Eugene, but for me, the community of Ferdinand feels like home. And I think that many of the small communities across the United States could receive this same kind of treatment. It would just take one person to actually do it. And I really feel a love for the community of Ferdinand, and I believe Eugene feels.
Any thoughts from you as a lifelong resident?
Oh yes, there's too many to go into, but you've known the people all your lives. You've known their backgrounds. You've known their children. You've known so much about them. It just evolves into one big family, and where there's a big family, there's love, there's concern, there's help. So it's just like Mary Frances says. I'm sure it's typical of a lot of towns across the country, but it's sure special for me.
That's a great answer.
For our viewers who did not have the opportunity, and most of them did not, to come to the show that is closing today, that we're taping the program at North Idaho College Union Gallery. I have a little booklet here, and I don't know where we can get this on the TV very much, but this is an excellent edition that you had for the show. And as I look through this, I noticed that the paintings are here, and I introduced the program indicating that there were 22 paintings of different buildings and the surrounding area and the farms. And then next to those paintings is Eugene's work and his essay. And so if one reads this entire booklet and goes to the show that was just closing, I have gotten a really great appreciation of how you've captured an entire community and its history through two things, through the paintings and through the essays. And may I quote from your works by saying, like a snapshot in time, this series of writings and paintings reveals a vanishing portion of our culture, small-town rural America. So I have several questions, and the first one is to you, Mary Frances. In answering Steve's question, do you know of any other artist in collaboration with a writer such as Eugene that has taken a small community and captured really a long history that is vanishing as the town has become very, very small and could disappear at some time in the future?
The only thing that I know of, there are several books that are photographic. They're photographic capturing of a community, and the history would be more about particular families and family names written in these books. One of the things that Eugene and I really wanted to do was, in the paintings and in the text, was to give enough impression and the spirit of a community without spelling everything out. And those that viewed and read the text and viewed the paintings would be able to put their own imagination into the presentation, the exhibition. I know that's kind of abstract, but we didn't talk about specific people in this. We did not do paintings of specific people. We left it pretty broad. And I think that's what's different and unique about this exhibit. I also think that the way in which we work together, which I like to say was the chaos theory, is also a very different way of working. I would work on a painting, and Eugene would not have seen it and just know the general subject matter, and he would write what his thoughts and inspirations about that particular site or building. And when we finally put them all together, it was we were quite pleased with how it came together. But I've not seen a project like this before.
I hadn't heard of one either. I have with me just a couple of postcards. Our viewers are going to see about 12 of the paintings next week when they come back. We're just trying to get the background, but here's a little example of one of the buildings and the kind of things we'll see. And then on the back, of course, you have the written statement by Eugene. I want to delve a little bit more into your soul and heart went into this project. I have interviewed other artists that say, my life is in that for a period of time. You shared with me on Wednesday at the reception your sensitivity and how you wrestle certain things. And I want you to answer 2 or 3 questions to the audience along this. Mary Frances, you've had a lot of paintings, you've had a lot of art exhibits throughout the West, and I heard you say that this is the most difficult because when you do a painting and people come by and see it, you're not even there. You had to take and open your soul up to Ferdinand for your first showing after this. Tell us how that was different for you.
Typically, when I present a show, a collection of paintings, I am generally painting with my own critic in mind. This show was actually painted with a particular audience in mind, and I felt that the paintings needed to be very respectful of the community of Ferdinand, as well as the people, the individual people there. So it was one of the toughest exhibitions that I've been involved with, but it was also the most rewarding. Of the 135 population in Ferdinand, for the opening we had over 165. So we had a very good turnout. And as people came in, they really stayed, and they spent a lot of time reading the text and looking at the paintings. And it was almost as if they were looking at family portraits. And that was really, really touching because I felt that I had actually reached someone, a lot of someone's, with this exhibit. I was nervous about it, but I have to say, Eugene had maybe a more difficult time because it's always hard to show to your home crowd. And many of them were not aware that he was even involved in this project.
So that was my next question.
Yes.
Eugene, you too were on display with your writings, and it was displayed there with the paintings. How did you feel?
Well, I would say it was a very critical audience to play to. You had better do it right. You had better keep it pretty broad. But I think her saying that she did the writing and I did the painting and we were not in close communication with each other, I was a real asset to the show. It actually more or less showed two different points of views on the same subject, whereas if we would have coabulated, I think we would have maybe come down maybe the same avenue.
So if you'd have seen her paintings before you wrote the script, you could have been
might
biased
have been
by
different.
that.
They might have been different.
Janelle Burke.
I want to ask about a specific painting. One, you have a painting that is called Liar's Hill. Mary Frances, how did you decide to do Liar's Hill? And did you take photographs first of that location and then try to paint from the photographs, or how did you determine what you were going to do?
Generally, when I work from a pen and ink sketch. I go on site and do a pen and ink sketch or a charcoal, very simple drawing, and then I take it back to my studio and essentially make up the colors and take out or add things that I think will make a good painting and help make the statement that I'm looking to make. For Liar's Hill, I had shown a colleague of mine the painting and told her I didn't know that that area had a name, and she said, "Oh yes, that's Liar's Hill." I said, "I had not ever heard that name before." She said, "Oh yeah, that's where my sister and I used to get our story straight before we went home very late and get our story straight on what we were going to tell our parents, where we were and what we had done." So I had talked to Eugene about that, and it just so happens that those were his daughters that had named that.
It just so happens I didn't know anything about it until it had surfaced.
Yes. So at the opening, all the local residents looking at this painting in Ferdinand said, "Where's Liar's Hill?" And then they read the story and they understood. So that was it was something new to the people of Ferdinand as well.
It was new to me too.
Yes.
And there's a wonderful, also a wonderful painting of the viaduct in Ferdinand. And many people who would have driven the highway before it bypassed Ferdinand would recognize the Ferdinand viaduct. Eugene, can you tell us a little bit about the viaduct?
Well, it's one of three on the Camas Prairie Railroad that transfers us from Lewiston to Grangeville. It's one of the three in the route. It's been there. It's been run into. It's been scraped. It's just a piece of obstruction there that you had to be aware of.
Why was it run into and why was it scraped?
Well, a lot of times, mostly by truckers would come in and they wouldn't notice the overhead sign on it. They would be over height. There is a bypass around it to take, but they'd be into the situation before they realized what was happening, and they would get hung up in there.
Because it really is a very low viaduct.
Yes, it
correct?
is. It's I think it's 13.9, I think, and it's one of the lower ones, and it's not very wide either. It's a narrow viaduct.
And it's rather narrow. It's got all kinds of signs on it, as I recall, to warn you.
Yes.
But you may not take those seriously until you actually find yourself in trouble. Is that
Yes,
what happened?
It squeezes you down pretty tight sometimes. You meet a big truck in there, and all of a sudden you're looking for some place to go, and there isn't any. So.
Kind of a one-of-a-time experience on the North-South Highway in Idaho.
Right.
Steve Sheen.
It's pretty clear to me. I mean, you're an artist, and you saw things in Ferdinand you wanted to paint, and you knew Eugene, and thought he could write, and that goes together pretty well. How did the decision come about to produce the booklet and the cards?
The books were produced, the catalogs were produced because after the exhibit finished its tour, I was afraid that Eugene's text would then disappear. And I really did want to make sure that the text especially was recorded. As an artist, I take slides in my work, so I would always have a record of that. But the text could be lost and forgotten. So I wanted to produce a booklet. We wanted to produce a booklet so that people could actually take something home and the history of Idaho would be retained in some small manner.
And the postcards?
And the cards were produced also because we felt that many people would be interested in the paintings, but not everyone could afford to have a painting. And there were only 22, so not everyone might be able to get one. So we produced the cards so people would have momentum to go, to take home with them.
Well, now my final question to you, because I'm assuming we're probably getting fairly short on time. Obviously, your friendship goes beyond this project, but are you going to have any future projects? Do you see any chance to collaborate again in the near future?
Well, I keep encouraging Eugene to write a book about Ferdinand. He has many more stories, and some of them are very, very humorous, as well as interesting about the town. But I don't know. We'll have to see. We have to get through this one.
Would you be available to illustrate that book if you wrote it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, there's hope then.
Yeah.
Well, I would sure hope we were not going to let this friendship and this association go by the wayside. We're going to have to do something with it somewhere down the line.
Absolutely. Even though I conned you, you're still okay with working, huh?
Right.
Well, as the host of the program, I always come back with what kind of a laser beam approach. And in looking at some of the paintings that I have before me here, and we have on video for next week, Mary Frances, you did some work, and artists often do this. They use different techniques and different approaches depending on the subject. You and I have a mutual friend who's an artist, Gary Hall, and he's going through a transition into some new areas of art. I sense in what you also did here, and I want you to share with the viewers, and I didn't notice this until you were talking about it on Wednesday, all your paintings of the buildings in this town are at the very top of the painting, leaving a lot of space below. And you're trying to capture something, and would you share, particularly with people who have interest in art, why that you are doing this?
Sure.
And there's something you're trying to say about this particular show that you might say differently and say in an urban area. I know I've seen some of your paintings from Seattle, and
yes,
in a very different style.
Yes, it is very different. Some of the difference is not only the placement of the building, but also the size of the pieces. Many of the pieces are quite small, and I could have worked larger, but Ferdinand is a very small community, and I really wanted to capture the smallness of it as well as the individual buildings. I also wanted to show a lot of respect for the buildings and to, in some ways, romanticize the buildings. So they're all placed on the upper half of each of the paintings, and that kind of, in some ways, holds them up. So you're looking up at the buildings, and it's a very small symbolic gesture, but I think it really carried the paintings off in a much more effective way.
So you're giving respect to the buildings, like this one is of the Ferdinand State Bank.
Yes.
It's kind of a historical building for that town. And by making the paintings small, you had some large paintings too, but they're more of other things other than buildings.
They show the vastness of the agricultural land. So those are the larger paintings, because when you see Ferdinand, you see this very tiny community, and all around it the Camas Prairie is just a very vast agricultural land.
And also, I heard you say, by putting the buildings at the top, another reason is by showing more space, it shows the ruralness of the area.
That's right. And it pulls out the buildings that a lot of times you just don't notice when you're driving by at 35 miles an hour or 55, depending on the speed of the area. So I've isolated a lot of the buildings, taken out any of the, perhaps a tree or another building close by, so that I can really focus on a specific building and give it the attention it deserves.
Janelle Berg.
One of the things that's happening to Ferdinand is that it's decreasing in size. What was it like, Eugene, in its heyday?
It was a real thriving, bustling town. People would gather there, and you'd they would just mingle so much, so well together that you just feel the closeness of the community. And it was a bustling town. It was something going all the time.
How many grocery stores were there in town at one time?
At one time there were 3 grocery stores.
And how many are there now?
There aren't any. We have one little bar that you can get a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk and some eggs and the essentials, but there's no grocery store left.
At one time, how many bars were there?
And there were 4 bars at one time, and they were bustling bars too.
And Mary Frances, there is something that catches the imagination about those buildings in Ferdinand. They really are quite unusual. When you look at the Ferdinand State Bank, it talks about a time when banks looked like banks. How did you decide which buildings to paint in the town? Because they are quite colorful.
They are. Well, there aren't many, so it wasn't a large decision to figure out which ones. Although there are a few newer businesses that I did leave out as far as focusing directly on them and focused on the older buildings. They are unique buildings, but as I spent 2 months in New Mexico actually working on many of these paintings from the sketches, and people who saw the paintings in New Mexico asked me, oh, is this the building down the road? Is this the building, you know, in the southern part of the state? So there is, while there is a real uniqueness to the buildings in Ferdinand, there is kind of a universal feel to many of the rural communities. The buildings are very similar.
We just have a minute left, and we're going to close the program out, but I also hear you saying that what is in this town could be somehow related to other small towns in Idaho, because there's some even architectural things that are common around the state.
Yes.
But you still have that connection to this particular town, because that's the one where you
Yes.
got that feeling of warmth.
Warmth and family, and there's no place you can get a better pear pie than at Ella Schaefer's.
Well, I guess that's a paid announcement that we weren't expecting. But with that, I have to bring the program to conclusion. On behalf of our panel, we thank you both very much for being here. And the good news is that for our viewers, we will have our guest back again next week. And on that program, we're going to show a number of those paintings and let you appreciate the ability of that artwork. And then secondly, ask Eugene to make some comments on his essays on those paintings. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.